I'd like to review some logistics. All attendees have been muted. The panelists and the presenters can speak, but the attendees will have to stay on mute. However, you can ask questions in the chat. So there are two panels on the right side of your screen. There's a Q&A and there's a chat. So please use the chat function. And when you use this, please select everyone as shown in the diagram. This makes sure that everybody sees your question and everyone can read it while the host reads it out for the panelists or the presenters to answer. So I'd like to now turn it over to Commissioner Darcy Houck to make her opening remarks.
Thank you, True. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop where we will be discussing the investor-owned utilities load integration capacity analysis, or ICA tool, its use cases, and the utility's recent updates on the tool as part of track 1 of the high DER proceeding. The overall purpose of the proceeding is to consider new and improved approaches to electric distribution planning and operations in order to accommodate the anticipated high growth of distributed energy resources in California. As part of today's workshop, Commission staff and the investor-owned utilities will be presenting on the load ICA tool and its refinements, followed by a panel of experts who will discuss various use cases for the tool, the current challenges in using the ICA data, and potential further improvements to the data that could enhance distribution grid planning. I'd like to thank Energy Division staff for their continued support in this proceeding, especially Taru for all of your work on putting today's workshop together. I'd also would like to thank the investor-owned utilities and all of the parties and stakeholders whose input has and will help shape the grid of the future. We rely on the considerable knowledge and experience of all of the entities involved in this proceeding to help achieve the ambitious goals we have collectively set for California. And with that, I will turn to my Bagley-Keene partner, President Alice Reynolds.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'll just add my welcome to Commissioner Houck's and say that I also wanted to thank the staff at the Energy Division for organizing this workshop, and also add a thanks to Judge Himes and Judge Lackenpaul for their work on the proceeding, and then, of course, to Commissioner Houck for her leadership on this very important work. I'm really looking forward to the workshop today. I look forward to learning more about the ICA tool, both in terms of its effectiveness as well as its limitations and improvements underway to refine the tool. As Commissioner Houck mentioned, the work here is incredibly important. We're moving ahead towards our SB 100 and carbon neutrality goals, and we're really going to need to thoughtfully prepare for the huge increases in the adoption of electric vehicles and building electrification. And so the grid of the future obviously really needs to be ready. The issues today we're talking about are more and more important every day: siting load precisely, refining maps and data input. And we also need to be transparent about the work and make it accessible to stakeholders. There's huge opportunity here, and there's also, huge problems to solve. So this is an important workshop today. I look forward to hearing from everyone, and thank you all for the time you took to prepare for and attend the workshop today. And with that, I will turn it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Tyler with Energy Division working on the high DER proceeding. And right now I'll be going over a workshop agenda and then giving a little introduction to the high DER proceeding and what load ICA is. Following that, I'll turn it over to the utilities for their presentation on energization and new load overview and use case for load ICA, followed by a 10-minute break, returning at 10:25 for another utility presentation on their load ICA refinement annual reports. We will then break for lunch, returning at 12:30 for the very special stakeholder panel. There will be a 5-minute break in the middle of that panel, followed by a 10-minute break afterwards. We will then return at 2:40 for comments, questions, and closing remarks for this workshop. And if we finish any section early, we will then move to an early break. So here's the overview for the high DER proceeding, and then following the overview for data portals and integration capacity analysis. The high DER proceeding was opened in 2021 by the California Public Utilities Commission in response to the state's ambitious climate goals. The goals of this proceeding are to enable swift evolution of utilities' grid capabilities and operations, to integrate solar, storage, electric vehicles and their supply equipment, and other DERs to meet the state's 100% clean energy goals. Another goal is to improve distribution planning, including charging infrastructure forecasting, to support cost-effective and widespread transportation electrification, as well as optimizing grid infrastructure investments by facilitating community input about plan developments, DER siting plans, and resiliency needs. Some important points about this proceeding is that it anticipates a high DER future and seeks to determine how to optimize the integration of millions of DERs within the distribution grid. Point of clarification is that this proceeding neither seeks to set policy over the overall number of DERs, nor does it seek to increase or decrease the desired level of DERs. Instead, it focuses on preparing the grid to accommodate what is expected to be a high number of DERs, while capturing as much value and mitigating any unintended negative impacts. This proceeding has 3 tracks. Here today we are talking about track 1, phase 1, which are near-term actions on distribution planning process and data improvements. Track 1 has several topics, including the distribution planning process, electrification impacts, data portals, and community engagement. And this workshop is focused on the 3rd, data portals. This proceeding also has track 2, which is focused on distribution system operator roles and responsibilities, and track 3 on smart inverter operationalization and grid modernization planning. So this proceeding has a scoping question related to data portals, which is track 1, phase 1, question 4. And this question reads, how should integration capacity analysis data and calculations be improved to enhance accuracy and usefulness for DER planning, siting, and interconnection, especially with respect to electrification load? Should the data portal design be improved to provide access to data for multiple stakeholders in the distribution planning process? So that's an overview of the background of this workshop, the high DER proceeding, and now we'll get into some information on data portals and integration capacity analysis. Starting at a high level, data portals are websites provided by the utilities that provide information on the electric distribution system. These maps include integration capacity analysis, grid needs assessment, and location net benefit analysis. And today we'll be focusing on integration capacity analysis. Now, integration capacity analysis, or ICA, are hosting capacity maps. These maps are designed to assist developers in finding information on where the grid has capacity to interconnect new distributed energy resources. There are 2 flavors of ICA. There's generation ICA, which provides info on where you can site new generation. And there's load ICA, which provides information on where you can site new load. This workshop is only focusing on load ICA. Now, why are we here? Well, on September 9th, 2021, an administrative law judge ruling ordered refinements to the load ICA. This ruling acknowledged that there is additional work to be done to ensure that the data is accurate and useful in citing new load, especially as it relates to transportation electrification. The ruling required that the utilities submit an ICA Refinements annual report starting in the 4th quarter of 2022, and those reports came in last December. There are 7 components of the ICA Refinement annual reports, and they are as follows. 1. A description of the issues and challenges associated with refining load ICAs. 2. A description of proposed solutions to overcome the identified challenge and a timeline for implementing them. 3. A description of the progress made towards addressing challenges with load ICA and aligning methodologies. 4, the timeline for implementing the solutions identified. 5, progress made to date implementing these solutions identified. 6, an updated table of aggregated uniform load results similar to that which the Interstate Renewable Energy Council requested from the utilities in May of 2020. And finally, 7, a summary of the utilities coordination efforts with the CEC on ICA tool updates to facilitate timely updates to the EDGE tool. This report is to be provided to Energy Division and to any lists that Energy Division deems necessary. And this report will remain a requirement until it is terminated. Additionally, the IOUs were directed to host a public workshop to review the topics of the ICA Refinement Annual Report and provide an opportunity for comment on the adequacy of their progress. And that is what we are here doing today. I will now be turning it over to the utilities for their presentations on energization, new load overview, and use cases for load ICA, as well as their load ICA refinements. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Ari, you are the presenter.
Okay, I'm just going to get my video started here. Thank you. And I'm going to be pulling up our PowerPoint slides. One moment, please.
And while you're pulling up that, Ari, can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes. Yes. Hi, Ryan.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. My name is Ari Altman. I'm from the Southern California Edison. I'll be facilitating the IOU presentation today. This is on load ICA refinements, and it's a joint IU Energy Division workshop, as we know. And this is the IOU component. So we will be going through a few presentations here. First, a quick background, and Tyler really went over this already, but as we know, on September 9th, 2021, the ALJ did issue a ruling ordering IOUs to do a number of things related to ICA, making specific changes to load integration and capacity analysis, inputs, assumptions, and methodology, begin filing annual reports starting in the fourth quarter of 2022, which we all did, and then host an annual workshop with ED to review topics identified in those annual reports and other issues raised by stakeholders. And that's why we're here today. Now, for our IOU presentations, we have broken it up into a few different components. First, we have two short joint IOU presentations, first on energization, and then on the history and use of load ICA. We'll take a 10-minute break after that, and then we'll go into our individual IOU presentations where we will present our annual refinements report. So that's going to be each of the IOUs you see listed here: San Diego, Southern California Edison, and PG&E. Now, I should mention we will have question and answer periods after each speaker presents. Please drop your questions into the chat, and we will get to those once that speaker is done speaking. So we'll move into our joint presentation first, and this is, of course, by PG&E, SCE, and SDG&E. We'll be first giving you an overview of energization and the tariffs involved, and I'm going to call my colleague Ryan Garugian, Senior Engineer at SCE, focused on transportation electrification, to talk about the load interconnection new business process. Ryan, take it away.
Thank you, Ari. So like Ari mentioned, I'm going to go over the load interconnection process at a high level that is pretty consistent with all three utilities. As we see on the screen, the load interconnection process begins with a customer coming to the utility and requesting service. We need to make sure first that we have all the appropriate documents so that we can begin the process of interconnecting a customer. So we begin with the application. We go through an project intake process where we gather information. We're identifying what it is the customer is wanting from the utility. Then we go through a planning and engineering process where we are studying that customer's request, making sure that we have sufficient capacity on the system, and beginning to design the work order that is going to serve that customer. And we'll talk about rates and tariffs on the next slide that relates to the planning portion. After we go through a design for the project, we will then get to dependencies. So we're looking for information like permits, easements, if there is any environmental review required. These things are to prepare us for getting to the construction of the project. We also need to make sure that we are working with the authority of jurisdiction or the city or the county. And then at this point, the customer also needs to sign contracts with the utility and pay any invoices that would be outstanding. After we get through all of those dependencies, we will begin construction. Typically, customers will begin construction first on the property, and then the utility will come in and do any necessary construction and then install equipment. And then at the end, we will energize the customer once all requirements are met. We can go into the next slide. All right, so the next slide is just an overview of tariffs that are pertinent to load interconnections. So Rule 2 is not really a specific rule to how we interconnect, but it is a description of service. So what options do the utility have to provide service? What are the types of services we provide, voltage level, phases like single phase or three phase, these type of things. That is in Rule 2. Rule 15 and Rule 16 are typical line extension rules. So this is how we bring service to a property. Rule 15 typically governs line extensions that are outside of the customer property, typically enfranchised, or where we are extending existing utility service to a property. And then Rule 16 is when we get on the property and we're going onto private property and we need easements, that we will then provide that service extension to get exactly to the customer service point. One note here is we have a new rule within the utilities, Rule 29 or 45, depending on the utility. This is a specific EV tariff, and it provides a little bit more that the utility will do on the property, and it really replaces the Rule 16 portion of the service. And we provide more to the customer that we will install the civil in addition to the electrical or the equipment piece on the customer property. And that pretty much finishes my 2 slides. So I guess we can go to questions if there are any.
And Tyler, are you able to see the chat in my presentation view? I'm not able to.
Yes, I am monitoring the chat. It does not appear that we have any questions so far.
Okay.
Just a reminder, if you are going to ask a question, make sure the to field includes everyone.
Yeah, I'll just give a moment in case people are still catching up on the question process. So
I do see one question in the Q&A, but please reminder, we would like to use the chat feature for all the questions in the future. But the question that is here is, what are the rules on who pays for rules 15, 16, and 29?
Yeah, so I can try to answer that, and if anybody else wants to to jump in on the utility side, please do so. So for Rule 15 and Rule 16, these are rules that in the end, the customer will pay for the service, but we do provide allowances depending on the type and the amount of load that you are bringing on to the system. So there are calculations performed, and depending on the size and scope of the project, there will typically be a small bill or small invoice associated with the Rule 15, Rule 16 portion. The Rule 29 tariff was specifically meant to limit the amount of charges to the customer. So we're trying to get that to be as small as possible, and the utility or the ratepayer is bearing most of that cost.
So I want to give a reminder to everyone, like Tyler said, type your questions in the chat, and please select everyone. I'm getting messages sent to the host, but please select everyone so the presenter and everyone here can see your question.
I'm seeing that selecting everyone is not an option for attendees, which is a bit of a road bump.
So Tyler, I guess what we can do is we can just have people raise their hand and then unmute them if they're not able to select everyone.
I am not able to unmute people.
Okay, so I can unmute people as if I see a hand raised.
I believe I saw a question come in from Sky Stanfield. Taru, are you able to see that question? Maybe you could read that one out for Ryan.
I'm not seeing that question. Was it in the chat or the Q&A?
Okay, I'm trying to get to that question. So Sky is asking the host and the presenter, can you explain more the project intake?
Yeah, can we go back one slide, Ari?
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess to explain a little bit more in this process, typically when a customer is looking to interconnect with the utility, they will reach out to the utility or go through some type of online portal to submit documents. But there's typically a little bit of back and forth to make sure that the utility has the correct documents and enough information for us to begin performing a design and a study. So a little bit more detail is we require certain information, and sometimes the customers don't have all the information provided to us, and we need to have a little bit of back and forth to make sure that we have the appropriate documents to begin going into planning and engineering.
So I see another question from Brian Turner. Are there generic cost estimates for Rule 29/45 extensions? Are there ways to get general estimates for locations based on the load ICA?
So I'm not sure I can answer that question. We might need to take that back and answer that offline.
So the next question I see, which I think all panelists should be able to see. So all panelists is an option available to attendees. And the question is from Chip Silverman. What is the timeline for the interconnection process that was outlined on the previous slide?
Yeah, so on the interconnection process, we don't really provide a set timeline. There are a lot of dependencies and interactions that go between the utility and the customer. What I will say is specifically to Rule 29/45, that process we are trying to get to a 125 business day complete timeline. And we're working on beginning that process and trying to figure out how we can try to meet that 125 business day.
I see another question from Sky in the chat that asks, what is studied when the study is completed? How long does it take and how much does it cost?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I want to speak to that because I can only say what SCE does. Maybe we can take that question offline and we can answer that specific to the utilities because there could be a little bit of intricacies on exactly what happens and how much it costs.
And I should mention, this is Ari from SCE. We will have the presentations from each of the IOUs, and we may be able to address those questions later in this presentation during the Q&A for those presentations.
And one more question here from Francis Cleveland. Do you ever provide alternatives to requests that may require upgrades to the distribution, such as limited load during high load times?
Yeah, so again, it could be different between utilities, but I will, I guess, speak to the SCE utility, which is my utility. Yes, we do. And we will try to work with customers to limit operation if needed while the utility is building the system upgrade to bring capacity to the area. And we have done so for customers in the past.
And I have another question. Can Rule 2 be mixed with Rule 29/45? For example, if a underground transformer is needed, can the line extension be under Rule 29?
Yeah, so just to clarify, Rule 2 is just a description of service. It really applies to all the other rules. Rule 29/45 is a replacement of Rule 16. And to your question, yes, an underground transformer, if an underground transformer is needed, the line extension could still be Rule 29, but that only replaces the Rule 16 portion if we need to do work outside of the property and franchise. That would be a Rule 15, and that would still apply, and the project would be considered a Rule 15 plus a Rule 29 in that example.
All right, thank you, Ryan. And we will have a lot more Q&A sessions here during the IU presentation. So I know that there are some specific questions for each of the IUs, and we'll get to those. Next, I do want to call on Saeed Jazibi. He's the Grid Innovation Engineer responsible for ICA at Pacific Gas and Electric. He's going to be walking us through a history and the current use of load ICA. Saeed, take it away.
Thank you, Ari, and good morning, everyone. So I'll be talking about the history of ICA, its methodology, and the new ICA requirements, which we'll call ICA Refinements hereafter. ICA was originally developed under Distribution Resource Plan proceeding. The CPUC issued Decision 1709-026 that basically order IUs to develop the ICA methodologies, including load ICA, with the stakeholder process and series of workshops and working groups in the DRP proceeding. The main use case that were discussed at the time were around the generation ICA, but the stakeholders have not been agreed upon a use case for load ICA yet. And that is why basically CPUC issued the ALJ ruling on January 2021 to start the process of refining load ICA. the ruling directed IOUs to develop a description of the uniform load methodology, inputs and assumptions, and host basically a workshop to discuss the methodology, inputs and assumption, and basically IOUs present similarities and differences between modeling approaches that each one of them have. Then the ruling invited actually IOUs and all parties to submit proposals for load ICA refinements. And after that, IOUs filed proposals in May 2021, which then followed by some comments from all stakeholders. Eventually, this collaboration and discussion between all parties resulted in the ALJ ruling of September 9, 2021 that ordered refinements to load ICA. The ALJ ruling had outlined the necessary steps, compliance items, and requirements for the IOUs, which we will be discussing in the following slides. With that in mind, the IOUs started the refinement process and projects to achieve the objectives of the proceeding after issuance of the ALJ ruling. So on February 2022, the IOUs filed their initial report on the load IC refinements, and at the end of the year, Q4 2022, all three IOUs filed their first annual load IC refinement report. Also, as we all know, with the increase in load demand and the state's ambitious goals for electrification, there is a lot of interest from all stakeholders, such as stakeholders in other proceedings for load ICA. For example, the EV infrastructure rule E5247 specifically ordered IOUs to seek a potential of implementing the load ICA refinements in a shorter time frame. So with that, I'm going to discuss the ICA methodology as it is today and as it is planned to be refined in the future in the next slide. Next slide, please. So the load ICA calculates basically the maximum uniform load that can be connected to different nodes in the IOU's distribution network at the point of interconnection without violating any thermal voltage violation or voltage variation or steady state voltage limits. The inputs to our models include, but not limited to, load assumptions and distribution circuit models. So on the flow chart on the right side, we take load assumptions and distribution circuit models as input to our ICA calculations. And then we run some pre-processing, which includes some data validation, QA, QC steps before we move to the main ICA engine. Then we move to an iterative basically process where we start adding load in increments to a specific node, and then we check for voltage, thermal violation until one of those criteria is reached. We do this for all nodes in our distribution network and for 576 hours. So as a result, it's very computationally expensive process. Then we move to post-processing step, and eventually we publish the results at the end of the process. Please note that like the ICA methodology is load agnostic. For example, we do not model an EV load or a building load in a different way. So it's basically useful for all types of load. It should also be noted that the load assumptions and baseline distribution circuit models are being revisited as part of load refinement plan as ordered by the ALJ ruling of September 9, 2021, which will be discussed in the upcoming slide. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we focus specifically on the fundamental changes ordered by the September ruling, which we call load ICA refinements. The refinements are basically focused on the inputs of the ICA methodology and are aimed to better basically align load ICA inputs and assumptions to IOU planning studies. The current load ICA uses historical load data. The IOUs use a 576-hour historical load profile, which represent 24-hour a day for 12 months. And for each day, we consider 2 loading conditions, a minimum and maximum loading condition a day. That makes it 576 hours. The network topology is also for the system as built. So in a nutshell, the current load ICA is backward looking. It should also be mentioned that the 3 IOUs are using slightly different inputs and assumptions at the moment. For example, SDG&E is currently modeling forecasted load and non-load projects, whereas PG&E and SCE purely look at the historical load information. So the IOUs have plans to refine these inputs and assumptions in the next revision of their ICA platforms. So we think after the ICA refinements, we will look at the future load profiles 1 year into forecast horizon. So this includes future DER growth, also includes future load forecasts and future approved load projects for the next year. Also, the network models that we're going to use in the new platform, we represent the system as designed. So in a nutshell, again, it's going to be forward looking and it's going to look 1 year ahead. This will include the planned capacity projects and planned network reconfiguration with a service date of within next year. Next slide, please. So the joint IOU believe that the load ICA is a useful tool for internal and external stakeholders based on historical load assumptions and as built circuit models. So we think that load ICA can provide users with a directional understanding of where additional capacity for load may exist. We believe that load ICA refinements will increase the usefulness of this tool as its inputs and assumptions will be better aligned with IOU's planning studies after refinements are implemented. And with that, I think we can open it up for a Q&A.
Thank you. There are several questions in the chat, but I would like to remind everyone, thank you for bearing with us, but and sorry for the miscommunication, but instead of selecting everybody in the to field, please select all panelists. That seems to be an option for everybody, and that will allow us to all see the questions and to read them out during the Q&A section. I want to go back to Sky's question, and hopefully we can get a representative from each utility to give a quick answer to the question on during the interconnection process, what is studied, when is the study completed, how long does it take, and how much does it cost?
You know, Tyler, that's a pretty long question for each of the IOUs. What we may be able to do is just to make sure that we have the right representative giving that answer. Let's circle back to that at the end of we have a 10-minute break before we get into the after I think we have some break time coming up. And how about after that break, we answer that question? So it might take a few minutes for us to gather the right person to come on. So it might not be, for instance, Saeed, who was just speaking. So let's just table that for after our 10-minute break, if that's okay.
Okay, I have that question marked and I'll make sure to come back to that. Then I'll get to some of the questions that are in the chat from this section. We have a question that asks, what is the assumption for loads throughout the rest of the PG&E system?
Can you repeat the question, please? What is the assumptions for the loads?
Yes, what is the assumption for loads throughout the rest of the PG&E system?
So we, at the moment, currently for ICA, as an input, we consider historical load data gathered from our AMI infrastructure. And we take a look at 1 year historical data as an input. And we have a basically moving window of the data. Basically, this historical data changes every month as we run our ICA calculations. So so that we use the most recent, basically, historical load profile from our AMI data, if that answers the questions.
We have another question that asks, can you please define future approved load projects?
Yes, so so after the customer submit their application and it goes through pre-assessment and then goes through detailed engineering design, when this application is approved to go forward with design and then construction, we will consider this load into our ICA calculations.
And can you explain what directional understanding means?
It is basically, I can speak for PG&E. We think that load ICA information externally is a good start for our developers to take a look at information and cite their basically their the location that they want to have their facility. It's a good start, and with the improvements underway with load ICA refinements, we're gonna add basically this is going to be a better directional actually and guidance for our customers. And then when they find that base location, they will need to submit their application and then continue the regular process for load interconnection. So it's basically at the beginning of the process, they can use the information to find the best location for their sites.
And can you explain how planned DER generation is included in the assumptions for load ICA?
So this for PG&E, and I welcome others from other IUs. For PG&E, we're using LoadSeer, or load forecasting tool, and the tool will use all forecasted DER growth within the next 1 year forecast horizon into load forecast assumptions. So basically, when we request for load information from LoadSeer, it's going to pull also the DER forecast information and we'll consider that into our ICA calculations for the next year.
And Saeed, if I could just add one comment to this, just to make sure we answer the question clearly. That's a future enhancement that the utilities will be speaking about later in the IOU presentations, that we're looking to enhance ICA, at least for SCE. We do not currently have this capability in the current ICA.
Yes, thank you.
Tyler, are you seeing the question that I submitted that was sent to host?
Yes, so I addressed that question. There's a question asking, how will customers know whether ICA results will be usable and reliable for interconnection review?
So currently, we don't have such application, as ICA results are being used for interconnection review. We have some upcoming slides. We talk about a use case that we will be proposing. This is for PG&E, at least. We'll be proposing something along the line of PG&E uses this information to improve customer experience at the earliest stage of interconnection process. So we think that the load ICA refinements are required to get to that point, that level of, I wouldn't say accuracy, that level of alignment with our internal planning studies or interconnection studies. We can discuss this in the coming slides.
Another question asks, how often will the baseline circuit load model be updated for known future approved loads?
So we run ICA calculations on a monthly cadence, and each month, depending on the changes that happen on the base load, as you mentioned, or the system configuration or the device settings, we run another study on feeders that have those changes, and we'll publish basically final results on the monthly cadence. So to answer your question, if load information has changed during the past month, it's going to trigger a new study, and we're going to refresh our ICA results on the monthly cadence.
Another question asks,
Tyler, I'm wondering if we're getting into some pretty specific questions that might differ by IOUs. I'm wondering if some of these might be held until the next section, the individual reports. I know you were in the middle of reading out a question. Maybe we'll take that last one and then take a break.
okay. Yes, this last question asks, if the ICA data is incorrect or inaccurate, how can utilities help applicants with the interconnection process?
So I'm not sure about like the word accuracy. I think we should be careful how to use it. As mentioned, we don't think that our load ICA information is inaccurate. It misses some important piece of information, which is like our load forecast, our system design, our network topology as designed, our future load that is going to connect to PGN to any of the IAU's territory. So it misses some of the very critical information as input. So we think with considering those inputs and assumptions, the IC results will be aligned, will be better aligned with our internal planning and interconnection studies. Said so, the planners and interconnection engineers use a set of more information, and also basically interact with our customers to get more information from them that will not be represented in ICA, but we think the ICA refinements are needed basically to get to that level that we can say we can use it for interconnection purposes and future use cases.
Hey, say if you don't mind me jumping in, this is Ely from ICGNE. I'd like just to add on to what Say was just describing, right? As Ryan presented in the load interconnection process, all the IUs have a really robust process now with load interconnection process, starting with submitting application. So we always encourage anybody interested in submitting a load interconnection, come to the IOUs, submit the application and get the process started. And we have dedicated team helping the developers and whoever interested walk through the process, make sure you submit the correct information, and also get an accurate understanding of if there will be capacity available to build the projects once the application is submitted. So I just want to throw that in addition to what Say was describing for load ICI.
Thank you, E. And E is actually going to be the next presenter after the break. So Tyler and Taru, if you don't mind, I was thinking that it might be good to just take that 10-minute break we had scheduled. And I know we have some questions in the chat and some different opinions. And I'm going to let Taru and Tyler decide how to handle that. I know we have a question and answer period in the afternoon where folks are going to be able to interact a little bit more. But maybe during the break, you can decide how you want to handle attendees wanting to share more of their viewpoints. So if it's okay, maybe we go ahead and take that 10-minute break right now.
So it's 9:56. We will come back at around 10:06 after a 10-minute break.